everybody. Welcome. On behalf of the Flute Fair, I'm Jenny Klein, and I'd like to introduce Christine Erlander Beard, or Christy Beard. We're happy to have her today to give us some information about career development.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm going to share my screen because I have a bit of a presentation to walk you through. If you have questions, feel free to just unmute and yell at me so that I know that you have a question. Or if you want to wait until the very end, that's totally fine as well. So let me get this set up real quick. There we go. And I'm assuming you guys can see this. So I call this session Self-Marketing Strategies for the 21st Century Musician, in this case, the 21st Century Flutist, but really they can be skills and ideas that anybody in any instrument or voice or any area of music can hopefully employ. And one of the things that I wanted to say just right off the bat is that I kind of feel like marketing has been a hot button topic item for the past few years, but I see evidence of even my own students kind of thinking that the marketing itself can take the place of real musical training and developing your musical skills. And I just want to be clear that this is meant to help enhance your visibility beyond your musical training. And so you do have to make sure that you're training yourself to the best of your ability to be the best musician you can be. You can market yourself and not be a skilled musician, but people are going to realize pretty quickly, what your limitations are. So just don't make the mistake of thinking that marketing yourself is going to be the only way to be successful in your career. And that's essentially what this slide talks about, is that everybody who you're competing against in the industry, whether you're going for an orchestra job or a position in a higher education at a university, whatever it happens to be, that everybody who's applying for those jobs is really high skilled and highly trained, and you also have to be. I've kind of littered this presentation with some different photos as well as some inspirational quotes that speak to me. And this particular picture I just thought fit the bill, that we all unfortunately have run into people in the industry that maybe act a little bit like this donkey here in the picture. And I just want to encourage, anybody who's listening when I'm teaching my students, that your attitude is really important in this industry, that there are maybe a few people who can or have gotten away with not being the nicest person in the world, and they're known as being difficult people to work with. But, I still think that their exposure is somewhat limited because maybe people don't want to deal with that. So just, be gracious, be grateful, be humble, be yourself, be nice, be willing to help. If you're invited to a festival or, any other place, don't act like you are the queen, and just be helpful to the people who are hosting you, and that can go a really long way. So be a nice person. This is probably the bulk of where my presentation is going to focus in terms of um, skills that are important, I think, for marketing yourself. I'm very much a big wordsmith. I'm a much better articulator in written form than I am in verbal form. But I feel that if you have good writing skills, good language skills, that this can really serve you very well in helping you to promote yourself. First impressions when you write emails or you text somebody, or even just on your website, the way that you present yourself in that written form can really make a good impression, or it can make a not so good impression. And it doesn't mean that everybody has to be a English scholar or whatever your native language is, that you have to be, the most articulate person, but you can check your work with thesauruses and dictionaries, and have people who are really good at grammar check your work before you publish things, just to make sure that everything is correct. And that just really helps to make sure that everything that you're doing is polished. So I also think that words are very powerful, and that it is good to be able to use a variety of words and adjectives to describe yourself. So first, we're going to talk a bit about writing artist bios. And I will say that when I was young in my career, that this was probably one of the most difficult things that I ever had to do, in addition to writing a cover letter to basically talk about myself. I hate having to talk about myself because I always feel like it's a very conceited thing to have to do, and it makes me uncomfortable. And 20 years later, I'm better at it, but I still prefer not to talk about myself. So some tricks that I learned when I was younger, because you have to be able to write bios unless you're going to hire somebody to do it for you. You have to be able to write a cover letter about yourself. Some tricks that I realized early on is that if I thought about writing my bio or my cover letter as if it was in the third person, as if I was writing it about somebody else, and I literally would start writing it, she da 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 da, Dr. Beard, or Christy Beard, or whatever, or maybe I'd even change the name so it was somebody else's name completely, so that that psychological idea of me always saying I've done this and I've done that, and it just didn't set well with me. So putting it in the third person really helped, and then I could transfer everything back to the first person when I was done. Or alternatively, if you're writing a bio for a website and you want it to sound or appear as if somebody, you did hire somebody to write your bio, or that it was written by somebody else, you can leave it in the third person that way as well. So that works in two different ways. It can be difficult to write about yourself. One thing that also helped me was looking at examples of other people, other flutists who already had bios online, and just seeing the types of words that they use to describe themselves, the way that they put the sentences together, the types of things that they highlighted in their bios, and then, would go through my line items of things on my resume and figure out how I could fit my specific traits into a similar bio. You don't want to completely copy somebody's language because, obviously that's stealing their language, but you can borrow little descriptive parts of the way that they've written their bios to adapt it for yourself and make it your actual statement. Focus on details that are important to you and also to your target audience. I'll talk about target audiences in a little bit more detail coming up. As I said, try writing it in the third person. Use a thesaurus to avoid redundancy, and this is something that I use a lot. Especially if you start reading your things back to yourself out loud and you start to hear that you're using a word multiple times, then I'll highlight that word and look at the thesaurus and see if I can come up with a comparable word that maybe sounds a little bit more polished. And then never fabricate. This is probably the most important thing. Be honest about yourself and your activities and your achievements, because especially in today's society, it's so easy for employers or for anybody else to actually fact check what it is that you've done, and you will get called out for not being honest. So I'm going to stop this. No, actually, I'm going to pull up this document. So hopefully you'll be able to see this on top of this and let me know if that is not the case. I'm going to get rid of this for just a second. So I do this. Can you guys see these bios okay? I'm assuming if I don't hear anything that you're able to see them. So
no,
I do this.
no, we still see words equal power.
Okay, let me see if I can get that away. Let's do this. Can we go away? Ooh, no, that just doesn't want to go, does it? Okay, let me try something else. I'm going to try sharing again and see if I can pull that up. There we go. Now, can you see the bios?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. So I do this with my students pretty much every year, and the assignment is for them to write a bio about themselves, and usually I'll get something very similar to what this first student wrote. I'll go ahead and read it out loud in case anybody can't see this, and I've just redacted the last names. My name is Mary. I'm originally from Battle Creek, Nebraska, but moved to Omaha, Nebraska to attend the University of Nebraska at Omaha. I am currently in the studio of Dr. Christine Beard as a junior flute performance major. As of this year, I'm a member of the university's chamber orchestra and a member of the UNO flute choir, where I play bass flute. I am also a member of the group called Broken Consorts with the Renaissance flute. So that was her original bio that she had submitted to me as part of the project. And there's a lot of good information in here, but you probably noticed as I was reading it out loud how many times the word Nebraska comes up in the spoken context, and it sounds really redundant. There's also a lack of detail about what some of the things are that she has listed in her bio, and I'm a huge fan of compound sentences, so just combining some sentences to make it sound a little bit more grammatically polished is something that I also encourage my students to do. And so I rewrote her bio to do all of these things that I just mentioned. And of course, because I was her teacher, I knew some other things about her background as well as things that she could interject into her bio that she hadn't put. So this is what I came up with as my revision. Having developed a strong affection for Baroque music and historical flutes early in her career, Mary serves as the core flutist in Nebraska's early music ensemble, Broken Consorts. She also plays bass flute in Omaha's Heartland Community Flute Choir, with whom she performed at the 2014 National Flute Association Convention in Chicago, Illinois. A native of Battle Creek, Nebraska, Miss Mary is the flute sales specialist at Schmidt Music and a junior music performance major at the University of Nebraska at Omaha, where she is a student of Dr. Christine Erlander Beard. After graduation from UNO, she plans to pursue a master's degree in musicology. So just having, a little bit more information, a little bit more detail about what some of these things were that she had listed, which were all good things, but we didn't know what the Broken Consorts was. It sounds less like a student bio and more like a budding music professional bio who happens to still be a student. And I have done these types of revisions even for some of my colleagues here in my School of Music here at the university. Because they know that this is something that I like to do, that I enjoy to do, and I'm happy to help them with that. But even if you don't have somebody around you that likes to do this type of thing, there are people that you can hire to rewrite these types of things. One more thing I'll say about bios before we move on. This was another example that I had from a student, and the highlighted words that I have here were things that she either misspelled or that were incorrectly used. I make a huge point, especially when you're in an academic setting, to make sure that you actually represent the name of the university correctly. And so we are the University of Nebraska at Omaha, as opposed to University of Omaha, Nebraska, as she had put in her original bio. And then misspelling the word principal is a huge thing that I see a lot in music bios, of course. So just making sure that those details are always correct. Questions or comments about bios before I go back to the presentation? Okay, I'm going to share the other screen. Thank you for, let's see, I think I have to close that first. Let's do this and then come back to here. Nope, that's too many things. Can I get back to that other one? Yeah, I'm going to try. Well, I seem to have lost the... Let me see if I can get back there. Sorry about that. Let me get this closed. Don't need that. Where did that go? That's done. That can go away. Sorry. Wow. I'm used to having two computer screens, and I didn't do that today because I didn't want to be sitting in my closet with all my clothes behind me. So here we go. Now I've got it. All right. The other thing about writing that I wanted to talk about is the resume and or your curriculum vitae, as we call it for those of us that are teaching in higher education. I tell my students, I teach my students and people that I'm giving these presentation to, I always keep a current copy of my CV on my desktop. And anytime, immediately when I get a call or an email inviting me to do a festival, or I've got an acceptance letter, or a performance or whatever that has just gotten confirmed, I immediately go to my resume and I open it up and I put it in there. And that helps me to keep it current on a daily basis. And that way, if I do need to send out that resume really quickly, I'm not having to spend a lot of time updating it before I have to send it to somebody. So I encourage any of you who are, especially in academic positions where you need to have that resume handy, to put some similar practice into play, because it can take a lot of time to update things if you don't do it on a regular basis. It's also helpful, especially when you're talking about a resume, to have 2 or 3 different versions of that resume on hand. If you're applying for an orchestral position, the things that you're going to list on that 1-page resume, which is what they usually want, might be and should be a little different than what you would put on a resume if you're, submitting your resume to work in the music industry, let's say at a music store, or if you are applying for a university or a college teaching job. So just having those different formats already laid out with the information there is, again, going to help to save you some time when the time does come for you to submit that particular resume or CV. Update it often. Again, it's helpful to look at other examples to get ideas about how to format your resumes. And now in the 21st century, I think that the formatting has gotten a lot fancier than what used to be considered to be acceptable. But you still want to make sure that the fancy formatting doesn't overtake the content of what is on your resume or CV. It needs to be clear, and it needs to be concise, and it needs to be easy to find the information that the reader is wanting to find in the document. Let's see, peruse examples for formatting. Make sure the information is clear. That's a huge part of the CV or the resume, making sure that people can find the information they're looking for. List items in chronological order with the most recent things first. It can be very tempting to list, the biggest thing that you had happen, but if it was back in 2008 and it's now 2021, it looks a little odd to have that at the top and then everything else kind of out of order. So put everything in chronological order, and it just makes more sense for the reader to see kind of what you've been up to. Tailor your resume to the specific job opportunity. And as I mentioned before, depending on what you're applying for, you might have to move some things around. If it's a performance-based job, making sure that you put all those performance activities towards the top of your resume. And if it's an education job, then they want to see all that academic experience first on your resume. The CV is all inclusive. So for those of you that may not be in higher education, curriculum vitae is essentially your life document of everything that you've done in your life since you have been in higher education. And it just becomes cumulative. And certainly some things can drop off of it if they are, small scale things. I don't typically keep all of my local activities on my CV, faculty recitals and chamber series maybe in town or something like that. But otherwise, it is completely inclusive of everything else that happens, and it just keeps getting longer and longer and longer. And you wouldn't want to send a CV to a orchestral job, so just know what it is that they're asking for. And as I said in the bios, make sure that you don't fabricate. Be honest about all of your activities and your achievements. You don't want to get caught saying that you've done something, or that you've graduated with a particular degree, or that you won a particular position if you didn't actually do those things, because it's too easy for people to find that out, and you just want to be honest anyway.
I might add, in business, that's a fireable offense.
Absolutely. Yes, and that's a good point too. There's been times in higher education jobs where people have found out years after the fact that somebody said that they, had a maybe like a cognate in musicology or something, and then 10 years later, the university finds out that they didn't actually have that particular specialization. And I have heard of people being released from jobs for similar things like that as well. So you just don't want to take those risks. This is one of those quotes that I just like to throw into this presentation. A negative mind will never give you a positive life. And it's so easy, especially in, I think, the music industry, to be negative about things. We critique ourselves for a living. We critique our students for a living. We are used to getting critiqued. And so it's easy to become kind of negative, I think, in our process. And I think it's so important not to allow yourself to succumb to being negative. I'm a huge believer in the power of positive thinking, both for health as well as for, just making things happen for yourself. Again, keeping in mind that you do have to make sure that you do the training and do the work, but having a positive outlook on things is only going to help keep things moving along for you, in my experience. So, creating an artist image might seem like a little bit of a strange thing for those of us who are classically trained musicians, but it's becoming more and more, even in our industry, something that is important, especially I think for younger musicians and even younger patrons, to kind of latch onto as they're looking for who it is that they want to follow, who it is that they want to listen to. Without saying names, I have a really wonderful friend who is from Argentina, who is a beautiful, beautiful flutist and piccolo player, and he absolutely refuses to put a website together, to do any kind of recording or any kind of social media marketing for himself. I tell him that he's an old soul trapped in a young body, because he has this idea that my music should speak for itself. And it's absolutely true. It absolutely should. But if nobody knows you're out there, there's just that there's that aspect of it. So I've offered and offered to do a website for him, and he just will not let me do it. So anyway, you want to create something, whether it's a website or your Facebook profile or Instagram or whatever it happens to be, that this is your moment to be able to create that image of yourself that you want your audience to see. Whether or not that's a formal image of you in a tux with your instrument, or in a formal gown, or if you want it to be really casual, you're still putting out an image in that sense. So, identifying and marketing the brand of you. And here's some things that you can ask yourself as you are contemplating what kind of image it is that you're wanting to put forth to your audience. Who are you as an artist? What do you want your audience to see? How do you want society to see you? What type of music do you represent? Who is your target audience? How does your programming strategy work into your artist image? How does your teaching and or research interests fit into your artist image? And do you want to be a model or a fashion reference for your audience or your fans? And for some people, some of these questions may not apply. But for some people, all of these questions apply, or, a majority of them apply. So these are all things to think about, as you're choosing the pictures and the videos and the type of language that it is that you're wanting to put into a website or into your Instagram page or whatever it happens to be. And I always love showing this example of Rarira. She was a flute student at the Colburn School of Music, really, really wonderful, classically trained flutist. And she has now since quit the flute. And even when she was a student at Colburn, she was also a fashion designer. She made her own clothes. She was into acting, and now she's gone into music production as her main gig. But looking at this photo, I usually ask my students when I'm giving this presentation, what kind of music would you expect to hear from her because of the way that she has presented herself in this imagery. And I mean, if you guys want to pipe in, you're more than welcome to uh, take some guesses as to what you might think you would hear her performing based on her image.
Avant-garde, punk rock.
Yeah, I was gonna say punk. She looks like really, but images can deceive.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. She, because she is a fashion designer and is very much into fashion, she likes to have these fashion forward looks. The video I'll just show a clip of for a moment. She won the concerto competition there, and she was performing the Ibert concerto, and she made her own dress for this occasion, which I thought was really awesome as well. But she's a wonderfully gifted classical flutist, in addition to doing some pop music as well. So just to give you a clip. Nope, and it's good. And we don't need to hear much more of that because we all know that lovely concerto. So, sometimes the image can be a little different than what you expect to hear. But in this case, all of the things that you just said are also true because she does do, or at least she did when she was still a musician, a performing musician, dabble in those other genres as well. Talking a little bit more about artist image, and I don't want to go into too much about the sexual imagery that is prevalent in, especially popular culture, but it's trickling into classical music and has been for years. I basically just tell students, and when I'm giving this presentation, that whatever your image is that you want to portray, you have to be sure that you're comfortable with it and that you own it. All of these women who I have pictured here, and I was certainly not going to choose any flutists to put into this presentation, but all of these women, including flutists that I know that tend to have a little bit more sexualization in their imagery, have gotten criticized for it. And my message to my own students and to people that I'm talking to about this is that, again, you have to be comfortable with who you are and what it is that you're doing, and have the musicianship skills to back up your performance, and hopefully that will quiet the critics. Wuja gets especially critiqued. She's a lovely pianist known for wearing short skirts, and unfortunately, when she goes and performs with Berlin, or in one occasion with the Los Angeles Hollywood Bowl Orchestra, the review that she got the day after had little to say about the musicianship of the performance, but was only talking about the shortness of her skirt. And it's unfortunate that we necessarily, and that we have to live in a society where that is still condemned, so to speak. She's comfortable in what it is that she's wearing. She chooses this because she feels young and vibrant and pretty, and she likes to feel that way. She likes fashion. There's a video here where she talks about how much she loves shoes, and she wants to exploit that part of her femininity. And if she's comfortable with it, then her musicianship hopefully overrides everything else. But I know there's differing opinions about that, and I'm just giving my own idea of the way that I view that. I wouldn't personally be comfortable wearing a skirt that short on stage, but if you are, more power to you, and just prove your critics that you have more to offer than your legs. And it's not just women who are getting criticized for sexual imagery. I didn't want to leave the men out of this conversation either. All of these poses by well-known musicians have nothing to do with how well they play their instrument. And I find it interesting, I think, to look at the different images that artists choose to use to promote themselves. They're all masterful in their own right, and it's not something that only females have to worry about. But I will say that the men tend not to get critiqued about the sexual imagery the way that the women do. one video. I have videos that are hooked up to all these, and I'll share the links so you guys can all go through them in more detail if you want. But this is something that is a trend that's happening amongst musicians, as well as having these little promotional videos for yourself. So I'll show a little bit here of Milos, guitarist. Get past all of the And again, we don't need to spend too much time looking at that. I always kind of make the joke that everybody goes hiking in a button-up sweater and, you know, that sort of thing. But, he looks great. It's a really well-produced video. It's easy to do these types of videos nowadays. You can just do them on your cell phone and put them into iMovie and, move things around. And it doesn't take more than a few hours if you are fluent with those types of apps, and you don't have to be produced by any big record company in order to make those types of promotional videos for yourself. But if you really want to get into more detail about what it is that you do and who you are, then this is where you really need to have a personal website, because just having a presence on Facebook or on Instagram or Twitter, it's really not a platform that you can really get into a lot of detail. And so I suggest having a website that all of those other applications are then connected to, so that if people see you on LinkedIn or on Facebook and they can click on the website link to get more information about you, and just make sure that they're all working together is the important part of making all of those things work for you. So on an artist website, it's not really complicated, and it can be totally free depending on how much you want to do and what your skill set is. Even somebody who has never built a website before, I promise, can do it within an hour if you just know how to move a mouse and to drop and drag items from your desktop onto a pre-made website template. And there's many different companies that you can use for this. I personally use Wix, Wix, but there are so many free ones that you can use that give you, a certain amount of bandwidth and a certain amount of space. And if you just want a one-page kind of website, it can be completely free, and you have control of it, and you can update it as often as you want. I would suggest, in any case, whether you use a free site or if you pay for something, to go ahead and register a personalized domain name so that people can remember your website address easily. And you can see up here at the top, I have mine, ChristyBeard.net. I also own ChristyBeard.com. I think this is actually pretty important to own the domains for all of the well-known extensions, because you don't want somebody making the mistake of typing in ChristyBeard.com and then they end up on a site that you really don't want them to go to, especially if your site starts getting a lot of traffic. Internet trolls will buy up the other domains that are, .com, whatever, .edu, and they'll start putting up other trash sites, and hopefully it'll stay clean. But you don't have any control over that. So I would buy them up just to make sure that you don't end up inadvertently sending somebody to a site that you don't want them to see. Keep the main menu options to a minimum and keep the site easy to navigate. It's just like when you're writing a bio or a resume, you want to make sure that things are easy to find, and then they're not having to scroll and scroll and scroll or click and click and click to get to what the information is that they want to find. Keep it well organized. Add photos to break up long blocks of text. It's just more interesting to look at if you have some photos. Choose sound files and videos that represent your best work, and avoid using annoying gimmicks such as autoplay. It's the worst thing in the world when you're scrolling, maybe you're at work or you're in bed late at night and your spouse is asleep, and you suddenly go to somebody's website and it starts screaming some video at you that they had set on autoplay. So take that off. it's just really annoying, and especially when you can't turn it off, people will leave your site pretty quickly. This was a mistake, or I wouldn't call it a mistake, but I think that, as you mature as a musician and you start getting even better videos and audios, making sure that you weed out some of those older videos, maybe that weren't as polished if you were a student, so to speak, and making sure that you keep the best presentations of what you have to offer on your website is something that I would highly suggest. Avoid typos, have somebody that's trusted look over your information. Make sure that your site is both mobile friendly as well as desktop friendly. Provide adequate contact information. And don't force visitors to register for your site. This is also an annoyance of mine, that if you have to register to see somebody's site, I'm probably just not going to go back to it, because I know I just don't want to give my information away most of the time. Make sure every page on your website is searchable on all the major search engines, and most of the web hosting sites will walk you through how to set this up. It's really not too difficult. If you list external links on your site, set them to open in a new window, because the last thing you want to do is have a link on your website that takes them someplace off of your website and they're no longer on your website. So have them
Excuse me,
open it up in a new
Chrissy.
window.
I'm
Huh?
sorry, Chrissy.
Yes.
Could you go back to make sure every page on your website is searchable? Can you just get into that a little bit more, please?
So when you go into the diagnostics of the web hosting site, for me it's Wix, and I can go into the tools, and it will walk you through. I'm not real tech savvy in terms of all the technology terminology and everything, so I'm not sure how much detail I'm going to be able to get into this, but there's certain things that like a Google search will look for, and if you go through the steps that are outlined on your web hosting, it will walk you through the types of keywords that you need to have embedded in the page, and make sure that it's actually listed in the searches. And if you do this, and then you go back and you actually search, for those keywords, it will happen almost instantaneously once you have it updated. So that's about as much information as I can give you, just because, again, I'm actually not the most tech savvy person, which is why I like using these drop and drag websites, because I don't have to know any code. I can, focus on the physical look of the pages without having to get into too much technical details.
I have just one follow-up
Sure.
question. Is your presentation going to be available to us?
Yes, it will be. And I have PDFs also of all of these slides as well. So I'll make sure that the New York Flute Fair people have that everybody can download. And I can also send it to you directly if you want to.
No, if it's going to be well, okay, we can
Yeah,
talk about that
I
later.
believe it's going to be, all the links will be inserted in your your performer bio. There's like a page for each person, so it'll be there. Bill, you can look at that on our
Okay,
website.
yeah, that's good, because
Yep.
Okay, because I do have a website, but in terms of websites, I'm not tech savvy, and I have a guy who does my website, and I'm going to ask him, hey, is it searchable? Blah 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 blah.
Yeah, that's an important thing to do, because sometimes, you could have a great website and it's just not showing up on all the different search engines. We think about Google as being the biggest one, but there are other ones that are out there too. So you want to make sure that that your website's popping up when somebody's using something other than Google. So
Great, thank you.
If you have other questions about that, I'd be happy to chat, via email or something after this too. And I can maybe show you some screenshots of what it is that my web host does to maybe help you figure out where that is in your particular web hosting site.
Great, thank you.
Let's see. The last thing that I had was to link up your website to all of your social networking pages and vice versa. You want everything to talk to each other, and this is also going to help to save you some time. If you have your Facebook linked up to your Instagram, and your Instagram linked up to your Twitter, and your Twitter linked up to LinkedIn, or whatever it is that you're using, that you don't have to go to every single site to post the newest news story that you have. If you can just do it once and then have it go to all those different sites, including your website, that's going to be the best use of your time. And, time management is also something that we all feel is very precious as musicians, because I do spend a lot of time online doing these things, but I want to make sure that I'm spending more time practicing. So all of it is important. One thing that I wanted to note about kind of this whole artist image and all of your materials is that I have spent a little bit of time over the past few years going through some of these marketing sessions that other musicians and flutists have been offering. And I think the information is very good. I'm not being critical at all. But I personally don't necessarily like the idea of, creating a badge or an icon for myself. I want my particular image, my icon, to be me. I want it to be my face. I want people to recognize that that's Christy Beard. And so I basically just market my face, my picture with all of my materials, and I have everything color coordinated. My website is basically the same colors of black and gold, just like this business card here on the side of the screen. I have my CV is in those same colors, so that it becomes kind of this impression that as soon as you see this color combination and you see my face, or you see, this certain set of pictures, you automatically know that it's Christy Beard, and that is my particular marketing strategy. There are others out there that, encourage people to create their logo, and it might be their initials and things like that, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you like that, that's totally fine, but I would rather have the recognition of my face as opposed to the initials monogrammed kind of thing. So I have everything matching. My Facebook page, I have two. I have a personal page, which is still a music page, because I didn't know any better when I first got on Facebook. And then I also have my artist page, and that artist page tends to match a little bit more frequently all of the other documents and sites that I have in terms of that color scheme and all of that. But my personal page, even though I still post a lot of professional things there, I let that be a little bit more free, because it's not just about me, the musician. I post pictures about my dogs and about my house projects and all of those things, but I don't put those things on my artist page. Something else that is brought up in a lot of these kinds of conversations is, carving out a niche for yourself. And in my own personal experience, I ran into the experience that sometimes carving out a niche could be a little bit too much of a pigeonhole. When I first got my job here at UNO, and I became internationally known as a piccolo specialist, and I was sending out my resumes for other teaching jobs, and I wasn't getting any bites. And so then I started asking some of my peers to look over my materials, and the first thing that they said was, well, you're a piccolo specialist and they're looking for a flutist. And so I needed to make sure that I not necessarily got rid of the piccolo things, but I toned it down. I didn't necessarily make it all look like it's all piccolo, 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 even though that's really my passion. I wanted to, show that I was equally as skilled of a flutist as I was a piccolo player. And then once I was able to even that out more, in terms of how it was being presented on my materials, then I started getting more calls for also flute gigs. But it's okay to have a specialization. I think it's important to have a specialization, because it's one way to identify yourself different from anybody else that's out there. And we all wear so many hats, and I have several here that are listed. I'm a piccolo specialist, I'm a arranger, I'm a chamber musician, a soloist, an educator, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we need to be able to do all these different things. So just being able to put on those different hats, but also have areas of specializations that make you unique with everybody else, against everybody else that's out there, I think is important. Don't be afraid of risk. Instead, be afraid of opportunity missed. And this has really been my mantra ever since I've been in school. I don't like being told no for an answer, and my mother would attest to that as well. And I think that has served me well, because anytime I've been presented with a challenge, instead of just taking it at face value, I try to figure out a way to make it happen. And so basically you can't wait for things to happen to you. It doesn't matter how well trained you are and how great you are. If nobody knows that you're there, they're not going to just come knocking on your door. So I like to use the analogy of, just kick the door down. So I won't go through everything that I have on this particular page. Some of the big ones were, in terms of me establishing myself as an international piccolo soloist, I created the first piccolo website completely devoted to piccolo back in 2007. And I did it because I have a passion for piccolo, and I saw a hole that was in the world online that didn't have anything devoted to piccolo, and I created Piccolo HQ website. And I just did it for myself and to share that knowledge and passion with others. And the very next NFA convention, I had all of the world's great piccolo players, Nicolas Mazzante and Jean-Louis Bonmarier, etc., Lior Eaton from Israel, all of a sudden were seeing me in the hallway at the NFA going, "Oh, you're Christy Beard." And I'm, thinking, "Oh my gosh, this is crazy." And that inspired me then to create the International Piccolo Symposium, which was the world's first piccolo specific symposium. And I invited Jean-Louis Bonmarier to be the first guest artist that I had for that event. And those two things just in themselves really changed my entire trajectory of my career in ways that I never could have thought would have happened, just because people knew who I was because of the website. And then when I invited Jean-Louis to come to Omaha to be part of this festival, he reciprocated a couple years later and invited me to be a part of his festival in France. And then that's when everything started just raining all over the place, because it was there that I met Carla Rees, who was the program director. Actually, she's going to be the future program director for the British Flute Convention. And then I also met Gabriel Goni, who's the principal flutist of the Costa Rica Costa Rica Symphony. And he also has a big festival down there. And he invited me to come to that festival. And then I just met more people through all those channels, and it just kept going and going and going. So the opportunity that I made for myself by creating these piccolo specific things ended up then trickling to these other events that became huge in my life and helping me to meet people that were going to help me even more in the industry. The last thing I'll say about this page too is that 15 years ago, when the British Flute Convention seemed like it was this faraway thing and nobody knew how to get on the program, and I just decided I was just going to send a cold email. "Hey, I'm interested." I said, "Dear sir or madam, my name is Christine Beard. I'm a piccolo specialist in the United States, and I would be very interested to learn how to take part in the British Flute Convention. Here is my resume, here is my sound file samples, and here's my bio. Thank you so much for looking at these materials. I look forward to hearing from you." And I had no idea who I was writing to. And then a week later, I get an email back from Trevor Y. And of course, being a young flutist, I was freaked out thinking, "Oh my gosh, Trevor Y is who answered me." And he said, "You're a really great piccolo player. I loved your sound. I would love to invite you to the British Flute Convention. And in fact, I'm going to make you the coordinator of the now mini piccolo symposium that's going to happen at the British Flute Convention that year." And I got to choose who the artists were going to be. And he had me do a teaching session to start off the convention. So that was a huge, feather for me. And I always tell people, I was like, just make the call, or just write the letter, write the email, because you never know if somebody's going to respond. And if they don't respond, fine, but at least you tried. And I think it's important to at least do that. And the last thing I'll say is, don't say something at the end like, "If you're interested, write me back and ask me for additional materials," because they won't do it. I put everything in the email that the reader might possibly want to see in assessing whether or not they were interested in having me. And it was right there for them to either listen to or look at or not. And that I think is a huge mistake that people make, is that they think that they're going to get somebody to write them back and said, yes, please send me the rest of the materials. Just send it all up front, unless you're applying for a specific job that tells you not to do that, because then that can be annoying. I know we're about to run out of time here, so I'm just going to finish up talking about friendships and collaborations in the biz. That I think this is something that's so important for everybody, is to just lean on each other in our industry. It makes things more fun when you have friends to share things with. Number one. Number two, we're all in this together, and it's good to help each other out. Technically, maybe we are competing for similar events or things to do, but I am always happy when I hear that my friends have gotten invited to do X, Y, and Z, and I'm not jealous of that. I know that there is other opportunities that will come to me as well, and I like to open the door for my friends as much as they like to open the door for me. And I think that it's something that we all understand and that we are willing to do for each other. Your colleagues are going to be your peers and your critics in the future. How you represent yourself now can affect your image and employment opportunities. When your friends get jobs, you might also get invited to do a gig with them, or be a guest artist at their school or whatever their place is. Working with composers is important to the future of our craft and our industry, and I can't stress that enough. And that's one of the things that I enjoy most about what I do. And as I mentioned earlier, life and music are much more enjoyable when you can share it with friends. Some things that I didn't really get to talk about is just using technology to its fullest. It's easier to get rejection when you're doing emails, as opposed to having to talk to somebody in person. Facebook, I still think, even with all of its problems, is a huge resource for us to use. I say that at least 60% of my gigs come from Facebook, especially the international gigs, with people that I've never met before. So I have encouraged my students to just create profiles, even if they're not always on Facebook, because it's just good to have a presence, because there are 2.8 billion users on the platform, and you never know who's going to find you. Yeah, and then I'll let you read through this one because I know that we're out of time again, but keeping up with trends is such a huge problem because there are so many different apps and social media sites that you can use, and it can become really exhausting. But making sure that they're all working together is really going to be key. And I have some links and resources that I'll share with you in the documents as well, including a bunch of different apps that I use for creating flyers and, let me stop the share here, graphics, and any kind of brochures or business cards. They're all listed on the materials that I'll make sure are available for you to look at. So that is the bulk of my presentation, and I hope that something that I've said today is interesting and or can help you in some way, and I'd be happy to field any questions if anybody has anything.
We have the luxury of being the last event in this Zoom room, so there's nobody hurrying us out to start the next meeting. There may be some people who have to go because they may not have been planning, but if anybody does have a question, please feel free to ask.
Who was your piccolo teacher?
Well, that's an interesting story because I never actually had a piccolo teacher. It was something that I fell into, and my teacher heard me playing in a practice room because of marching band, and he thought I sounded really great on piccolo, so he encouraged me to start taking orchestral auditions on piccolo, and I won. I grew up in Arkansas. I won a couple of regional positions in Arkansas, and then when I moved to Texas to go to graduate school, I won a couple of regional positions there and started really focusing on piccolo. My teachers themselves were not piccolo players, but they were always very open to me bringing the instrument in and playing for them. So I'm very thankful for that. The one and only actual lesson that I've had on piccolo as a student was when I was a doctoral student, and I heard Zart Evie at the Texas Flute Fair, and I had to go out and study with her after I heard her. So I flew out to Seattle and had a couple lessons with her. But that was my only true training as a piccolo player, and yeah, that's how it started. It was just kind of a fluke.
Okay.
All right. Well, if there aren't any more questions, I'd just like to thank Christy for this fabulous presentation. On behalf of the New York Flute Club and the Flute Fair, I want to thank all of you for attending. And you'll get your documents to probably Jeff Mitchell or Deirdre McArdle, and they'll make sure that it's posted in your presence on our Flute Fair page, so you all can find it later. Oh, Rebecca, you have a question? Sorry.
Yeah, Christine, thank you so much. This was wonderful. I have a quick question for you. My trouble is I always have difficulty balancing social media every day, and just keeping up with website updates and balancing social media. And, like something that I might think is interesting doesn't get any interest when I post it, and vice versa, that I don't post something and everybody says, how come you didn't post? So can you talk a little bit about like work life and social media, like balance?
Yeah, that's always the balance question is always difficult. I probably spend a little bit too much time on social media, to be honest. But I worry a little bit about how much I'm posting and what I'm posting as well. And occasionally I'll reach out to people that I know follow me and ask them, am I posting too little? Am I posting too much? And usually the feedback that I get is that it's just the right amount. So I don't know if that's just become over time that I have kind of just gotten attuned to what people seem to be interested in. But I think, being honest with yourself about what your interests are and what you're proud of and what you're wanting to share, I think is going to go a long way with your followers, with your fans, if you want to call them that, with your friends. And if there's people on your site that you do know, and you can ask them every so often as to whether or not they feel like you're posting too much or too little, or the types of things that they think that would be more interesting, you can always ask them for that type of feedback. But I don't worry too much about whether or not when I post something, if it doesn't get a lot of feedback. Sometimes I think something's really important and then it just doesn't get any hits, like you said. But it's there, it's out there for somebody to see if they do happen to run across it. And if it was important to me to post, then that's what I kind of use as my gauge. So I don't know if that really helps you in terms of answering your question or giving you different ideas about it, but I think just being true to yourself is going to be the most important thing.
Yeah, and the big thing is just finding time every day to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I am not a dedicated schedule person where I always get up at 8 o'clock and I always practice from 10 to whatever. And, so I squeeze things in when I have the time. So if I have 10 minutes in between students to practice, I'll use that 10 minutes to practice. Or if I don't feel like practicing, I'll jump online and I'll put a post or, just change a picture, because changing your profile picture every so often also puts you at the top of the news feed, even without having to say anything. So just doing little things like that can just keep you in the cycle, which I think is the most important thing, is just having visibility, even if it's not something that everybody is always interested in reading about. But it just, they see your face and they go, oh yeah, Nicole's there. And then they might click. So that's, I think, the most important thing is just people know that you're there.
Cool. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
All right. Well, if nobody
One
else has
last
any...
question.
Oh.
Is your email address on christybeard.net? Or you contact
it is not. Well, it is on the website, but you can email me at piccolo71@gmail.com. Kind of gives away my age a bit, but piccolo71@gmail.com is probably the best place to reach me.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you all for being here, and thank you again for the New York Flute Club for inviting me to give this presentation.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful. Everybody have a lovely evening and safe travels home.
We're already there.
Yeah, I know. Bye-bye, everybody.
Ciao.